My name is Julie B. Olson Buchanan, and I am at California State University, Fresno, which is in Fresno, California. I am a professor of human resource management and department chair. Like many students, when I started my undergraduate career, I was undeclared, but the topics I was interested in, or the majors I was interested in, both used a lot of psychology. So I was thinking about public relations or speech and hearing science, and was taking psychology and enjoying psychology courses when my mom read a wedding announcement that described someone's degree as industrial or organizational psychology. I hadn't heard of it, but it sounded interesting, and so my mom, on my mom's advice, I looked it up and discovered it was something I was really interested in. And I happened to be at the University of Illinois that has programs in IO psychology. So I ended up transferring an undergrad to psychology at Illinois, and with a focus on IO psychology, and got into the honors program, started doing research, and decided to pursue a doctorate in IO psychology, and looked at a number of different universities, and selected the very same university where I already was, University of Illinois, as an excellent program. So I did stay on. While I was at Illinois, I did an internship at IBM at national headquarters in Purchase, New York, where I really got a better understanding of what IO psychology is about in terms of the applied area, in terms of working in-house. And also it helped me realize that I loved working at IBM, but I also really wanted to be an academic. So when I was on the job market, my 5th year of graduate school, I looked at both psychology, IO psychology programs, and business programs as possible teaching outlets. And I chose to come to California State University, Fresno in the business school because I thought I needed to really work on better communicating psychology to a business audience. And I wanted to find a place that would stretch me in that direction. So I arrived here at Fresno State in 1992. I don't move around much, so I have been here all that time, and now I'm a full professor and have been department chair for the past 10 years. So a book that recently came out that I was one of the editors on is Using IO Psychology for the Greater Good, Helping Those Who Help Others. And this is one of the first books of its kind in IO psychology, because it really pushes the boundaries of IO psychology to a new realm. Traditionally, IO psychology has focused on enhancing the well-being of individuals in the workplace, as well as enhancing the effectiveness of the organizations. So it's focused on individuals and organizations. But over the past 5 or 6 years, we've started as IO psychologists to think about how IO psychology can actually affect the society, or the larger society, in terms of well-being. So this book marks a departure of sorts from the traditional criteria that we look at in terms of designing IO systems and using IO psychology. It's broadened it to think about how IO psychology can help the world, how it can help make the world a better place, if you will. So the book is focused on 3 primary areas that IO psychology can actually be used to improve societal well-being. The first section is really focused on the traditional for-profit corporate domain, where we're looking at how IO psychology can be used to help with environmental sustainability decisions that the organization makes, as well as enhancing volunteer programs that current employees are involved in, and other things along that regards, diversity and so forth, how that contributes to society. The second major section focuses on applying IO psychology to a nonprofit context. Traditionally, we really focus in the field on for-profit, on organizations that are trying to maximize profits while still paying attention to employee well-being. In the second section, we're really focusing on those those nonprofit organizations like food banks and animal shelters and the Red Cross and so forth, whose mission is actually to address some kind of societal issue. And we haven't given a lot of attention to that in our field previously, but our field is so relevant to really improving the effectiveness of organizations that are focused on societal and well-being. And finally, the last section is perhaps the most innovative in terms of reflecting changes in IO psychology. The last section looks at examines how IO psychology is being used or could be used to actually address more of the grassroots, worldwide attempts to improve, address poverty reduction or disaster recoveries when we've had international disasters and have come to the aid of other countries. How can we improve what we do in terms of getting the right volunteers and being able to really address and really help other countries and major disasters better. So this last section is called Humanitarian Work Psychology, and this is a burgeoning field in IO psychology. All three of those areas, so corporate domain, nonprofit, and finally the humanitarian work psychology, what they have in common is you're using all of these theories and empirical research that we've discovered and identified in IO psychology, but you're doing so in a different context. You're examining how it really helps society as a whole, rather than focusing only on the individuals and the organization. It's broadening the criteria. Our community food bank is our major provider of food to the agencies that serve the hungry in actually a 5-county area. So it spans 5 counties in Central California, which actually, unfortunately, are some of the hardest hit with respect to hunger. We're typically the second hungriest or second in the nation in terms of need of food. And this organization has been in existence a little over 20 years. And a few years ago, we became interested, actually my department became interested in forming a partnership with Community Food Bank, where we would provide expertise in terms of anything that we had expertise in that might help them become more efficient and more effective in terms of distributing more food and meeting the needs of the food agencies, the homeless shelters, the soup kitchens, and so forth. So what we did was we did this in a number of capacities. We worked on actually re-examining their staff job descriptions. We went through a series of strategic job analyses because the organization was expanding and changing. So we were actually conducting job analyses for jobs that they wanted to have or were moving into. So we redid the job descriptions. We actually created a compensation system and a compensation policy that would help get them in line with other nonprofit agencies in the area. We also developed some training programs for staff, helped with employee handbook by pulling in relevant employment law. And we had a number of ways that our students worked on developing volunteer recognition programs, addressing kind of communication issues between the food bank and its 200 agencies that actually directly serve the food. So we did this for about 5 years. When we started, Community Food Bank was distributing 7 million pounds a year, which is very impressive. But by the end, when we had really worked on focusing on its human resources, its individuals who were performing the work, they were actually distributing as much as 40 million pounds a year with the same number of staff. So by being able to use the best of IO psychology in terms of what we know, we're actually able to enhance their effectiveness in such a way that they could distribute much more food without adding to their overhead costs in terms of number of staff employed. In terms of how this has led to new areas of research, this involvement with Community Food Bank, and then I have actually joined the board of directors and became the board president for a couple of years. I termed out. I was on for 6 years, so now I have to step off for a couple of years. But by working in this capacity with this nonprofit agency, that's actually what sparked my interest in nonprofit research and really what led to the book that I described earlier. So sometimes you just notice a need and it sparks an interest in the research. I realized there really wasn't that much out there about using IO psychology in a nonprofit context. One of my primary research interests is workplace mistreatment, or mistreatment in the workplace. And I actually became interested in this topic when I read an article in a class in graduate school. I read an article, and its conclusions and its methodology didn't sit well with me. It was something that I couldn't stop thinking about. And the article had concluded that individuals who file grievances are punished by their employers for filing grievances. But as an IO psychologist, I wanted to examine how much of just feeling mistreated or being part of this situation where you felt compelled to file a grievance, how much that played a role in terms of lower performance ratings or higher absence rates or higher turnover. So I was really interested in the psychological aspects of the workplace where you feel that your supervisor mistreated you, or you were passed over for promotion, or you're being harassed. I was interested in the psychological consequences of the actual original cause for the grievance. So that sparked my interest initially. It had not been studied in IO psychology. The article I read was actually in a related cognitive field in labor relations. So this was being studied in a union context, but not with IO psychology approach. So that sparked my interest, and I became really compelled, really focused on pulling that workplace mistreatment into the traditional IO psychology literature, because the more I studied it, the more I learned about it, I realized how important it is. If you think about how much time you spend at work when you have a full-time job, if you feel that you're being mistreated, it's all consuming. It affects so many of your waking hours. And with IO psychology looking at individual well-being as well as organizational well-being, those are really important issues. So have started to pull it into the IO psychology literature, pulling in social psychology along the way, and really tying it in with other related areas in IO psychology. So it's something I'm passionate about. And when it is something that becomes your main research area, you find that people tell you stories. They give you anecdotes about their cousin or their spouse or themselves who went through some process at work where they felt mistreated and how it affected them. So it certainly underscored or reinforced my belief that this is a really important area in IO psychology that has been under-examined. So that is something that I continue to be interested in today, and continue to try to research. It's a hard area to research because typically organizations are not all that excited about you asking their employees as to whether they feel that they've been mistreated at work. They're afraid you're opening up a can of worms. So it is a challenge to be able to get access to employee data, but it's well worth it. And for organizations that really want to make improvements, they're more open to that idea. So the work-life research actually was sparked by our HR director, who here actually on campus had expressed a concern that some of our top administrators never seemed to stop working, that they would go on vacation, and this was back before people had smartphones, that they would check their email from the hotel, and they would respond, and they would use their cell phone to take care of things along the way. And she expressed a concern that people were never turning work off. And so this started a series of studies. It became a very strong interest of mine to look at the role of technology and work-life balance. So I initially started looking at the use of, back then they were Blackberries, what everyone had, Blackberries and so forth, to allow you to be at work when you're physically not at work. And today, of course, this is really expanded with more and more people using their smartphones or their tablets to stay in touch with work, or to stay in touch with their family life or their personal life. So some of those boundaries have blurred. So I'm very interested in how the technology plays a role in that, and whether it actually leads to higher work-life conflict as you're trying to be in two places at once, as you're being interrupted, as you're not fully immersed in your personal life or fully immersed in your work life. How does it actually help you balance, or does it lead to maybe a greater work-life conflict or a greater difficulty in being able to focus on one domain or the other.